борьба ну, это именно все. Ну и все. Ну да. Ну да. И больным из-за... Как вот, да, понимаешь, унификация, да. Да. А. Забей. Да, что людям даешь? Что такое? Да, да. Ну и, да, понимается. Вот это вот реально, потому что это реально. Тут можно идти, воевать, вообще убить можно. Потому что там действительно сложно, понимаете? Да, подняться в обществе и не испортить. Ну, я понял, что да. Это, да. Ладно. На тесте. Бля, наверное, не. Это прикольно. Хочешь такой быть, нет? Понимаю. Для себя хорошо понимаешь. Забудь, это издевка просто. Да. Такой. Так, где эта штука?
Престиж образования до сих пор играет огромную роль при приеме на работу. А жаль. Кроме диплома есть, конечно, еще и много других причин. Например, удобное географическое положение Чехии. Отсюда удобно, а самое главное дешево, можно добраться практически до любой страны Европы. Кроме того, цены на продукты здесь не сильно дороже, чем в России, особенно если сравнивать с ценами в других странах Европы. Так, например, в Германии все будет стоить дороже, чем в Чехии, примерно в 2,5–3 раза. Ты, кстати, и сам можешь проверить цены, в описании будет ссылка на сайт Майлитаки, где собраны актуальные каталоги самых популярных магазинов в Чехии. Еще приятным фактом является то, что ты можешь сам себе выбирать предметы на учебный год. Это очень удобно, если тебе что-то особенное интересно и не хочется тратить время на другие, по твоему мнению, менее важные предметы. Другой причиной являются дни карьеры. Это такие мероприятия, на которые приезжают различные компании с целью набрать студентов себе в штат. Неважно, на стажировку тебя берут или на работу. Где ты еще попадешь в такие компании, как, например, ABB, Siemens, Porsche, Hyundai. Кстати, я сейчас работаю в ABB. А еще, если ты боишься остаться тут один, не переживай, такого точно не случится. Ведь в твоем общежитии по-любому найдутся русскоговорящие ребята, с которыми ты сможешь подружиться. Да, Толь?
Да, Вань, вали уже, снимай другое место.
В общем, ребята, если вы еще не решили, куда ехать учиться, рассмотрите Чехию. Тут классно. Хотите еще интересных видео об учебе в Чехии? Ищите их здесь.
Hypothetically, let's say your job has made you very rich all of a sudden. Yet, due to the extra work demands, raising your children has suddenly become a problem. Well, that's where a nanny comes in to ease that issue. Today, we're going to look into the world of being a nanny for the wealthy. Is there any truth to the Mary Poppins franchise? Do you need qualifications to become one? How much money do nannies make? These questions and more will be answered in the video. As a taster, elite nannies can make an absolute fortune. So, let's get started. The most important aspects of being a nanny, or manny as the men are sometimes known as, is of course looking after the children under your care. This includes cleaning, cooking, and laundry for the kids. They also provide activities for their charges in order to get the best development for them, such as sports clubs, going to a museum, or so on. If the kids are sick, like with a cold, the nanny is the one that primarily takes care of them. They also take the children to nursery, school, or other such places. Full-time nannies are often expected to work 60+ hours a week and can be required to work longer if needed. There are also a number of extra tasks a nanny might do. For starters, they might be required to travel abroad with the family for work or a vacation. However, it won't be a relaxing time for the nanny. They're on the clock after all. There's also the role of nanny housekeeper. On top of looking after the children, they're expected to combine the tasks of a housekeeper, such as buying groceries, running errands, cleaning the house, and more. There's also live-in and live-out nannies. The former is when the nanny lives within the family home. There's also the role of governess. This is when teaching the children is the primary role. One of the most important responsibilities of a nanny is choosing to work with the right family. Autumn Backman, a professional nanny, stated, quote, "It's a relationship, not a job. Picking a job just for a high salary is like marrying for money. It's the wrong reason," unquote. As such, trust between the nanny and family is vital. Otherwise, it could end up in court, such as in 2015 when Mariah Carey and Nick Cannon were sued by their nanny, Simonette DaCosta, for unpaid wages and unfair dismissal. She was seeking $100,000 in damages, and it wouldn't be the only time a former nanny would sue Carey. Discretion is key. It's expected that the nanny's client's life won't be spoken about, not even to friends or family. Sometimes they might even be asked to sign a non-disclosure. Due to this, it's easy for a nanny to feel lonely. They're regularly forgotten about for the client's events, have no one to confide in, and can feel isolated if they're on call for the client 24/7. But the role can allow you to see wonderful sights and meet interesting people, so there are pros to it as well. If you're thinking about becoming a nanny, on the bright side, it doesn't require any formal qualifications, but there are a number of courses that can help you land that child-caring role, either through a client directly or...
Hello and welcome to today's video.
Ну, ты меня понял. Женской профессии вообще, ну как бы. И я тебе еще раз скажу, ошибаться здесь негде. Он тебя понял уже просто, да. Меня это не волнует, понимаешь, это твои... Ну, он тебя понял уже, да. Мне не для детей быть. Нет, спасибо. Может, такой профессии вообще не существует. Как один из вариантов тебя. Просто. Да, потом в чем твоя... Ну, это долгий разговор, просто давай не будем. То есть, да. Ну и что ты хочешь-то? У тебя одна жизнь, понимаешь? Ну, он не понимает просто себя, да. Вот и не лезь в эти щели, просто, да. Ну, я понял, просто, да. Да.
I'm Alicia, your host, and today we are going to compare and contrast the teaching styles of Chopin and Liszt, who could best be described as frenemies. These two composers were active around the same time in the 1800s in the Romantic period, and they were both very revered, both very talented writers and piano players, but they couldn't be more different. Chopin was all about subtlety and sensitivity, whereas Liszt was all flair and bombast. I thought it would be fun to explore their teaching styles in today's video. We already know that their temperaments were very different and the way they wrote music was very different, but I wanted to explore their teaching philosophies just because as a teacher I find that interesting. And as a student it's also interesting because you can kind of think, well, do I agree with Chopin's point of view more or do I agree with Liszt's point of view more? And neither point of view is right or wrong. That's why we're doing this video. I have my own personal preference.
Взрыв в жилом доме, 4 террориста погибли при взрыве!
Как чувствовал, что увижу вас, Камара.
Был приказ о ликвидации моей группы.
Well, welcome. It's still Friday the 3rd of December, and there's some new news from South Africa. In fact, basically, this is the first paper to be published on Omicron, so I want to look at it now and give us the up-to-date information. And it's basically telling us that people that have had the infection can catch Omicron, that the natural immunity is not protecting them fully, at least from reinfection. It's not telling us about immune escape from vaccine. It's not telling us how sick it makes people. It's just telling us what it's telling us. And this is the way information is probably going to be coming, actually. It's going to sort of come through in dribs and drabs. But this is a very important drib or drab. I'll let you decide which. So here we have, how likely is someone who's already had COVID to catch Omicron variant is the question. This is one of the things we've been wondering out loud about now for some time. So catching it twice or more. So if you've had the natural infection, then Omicron comes along. Can you catch Omicron as well? The answer is yes, you certainly can. Now this is from the National Institutes for Communicable Diseases in South Africa. So this is pretty good. This is pretty good data. Now it's not a peer-reviewed paper, but it is a paper, and of course you've got the links for it in the description. Increased risk of SARS coronavirus infection associated with the Omicron variant in South Africa. So what's known about this topic already? Prior infection to SARS coronavirus 2 gives a fair degree of further protection. In other words, this is nothing to do with the vaccine. This is just, if you've had the virus, then you've got about an 84% reduced chance of catching it if you're exposed to it again. Nothing to do with the vaccine. This is in unvaccinated people. So that's kind of where we are, fairly good levels of natural immunity. So 84% reduced risk of infection. What this study adds is, now this is interesting, we find no evidence of increased risk of infection associated with circulation of beta or delta variants. Now this is quite an important point. What they found here is that in the previous waves in South Africa, in the previous waves, people were protected. They were not more likely to become reinfected, so they were protected. In fact, this is a bit surprising because when you do the in vitro studies, when you actually look at the way the antibodies interact with things, you would expect that people with the beta and the delta would become reinfected at a greater rate than they actually did in the real world situation. But of course what matters is the empiricism in the real world. Forget the benches and the laboratories. This is what the real world data shows. And it actually shows that they weren't more likely to become reinfected, but with the Omicron variant they definitely are more likely to be reinfected. So, surprising there, we find no evidence of increased risk of reinfection risk associated with circulating beta or delta, as you would expect, but they didn't find it. So this is what science is, it's what happens in the real world. Compared to the ancestral strain in routine epidemiological data from South Africa, and as we'll see, this is pretty large-scale data. In contrast, we find clear population evidence to suggest that substantial immune evasion by the Omicron variant occurs. Now, we don't have a lot of in vitro laboratory data so far on the likelihood of reinfection with Omicron, but we now have some real-world data. So the real-world data, which of course is data that everyone matters, that's the one that really matters, is actually come ahead of the laboratory data. So that's very good for the authorities in South Africa. They're well on the ball. In contrast, we find clear population level evidence to suggest substantial immune evasion by the Omicron variant. People are getting reinfected. And Omicron selection advantage is at least partly driven by an increased ability to infect previous infected individuals. In other words, the reason that this variant has spread so quickly through South Africa is because it is reinfecting other people, reinfecting people that had already been infected. It's increased its target of opportunity, if you like. People that had been infected can get reinfected, and that's part of the selection pressure. That's why Omicron is now the dominant variant in South Africa. So dominant variant, increased reinfection risk, yes, there is, we can say that now. Omicron variants of SARS coronavirus 2 demonstrated substantial population level evidence for evasion of immunity from prior infection. That direct quote from the authors. Retrospective analysis of routine epidemiological surveillance data, and this is taking us from the 4th of March to the 27th of November. And we now know that the Omicron period in South Africa probably began in early November. South Africa's national notifiable medical conditions surveillance system. So now this is whole population data. 2,796,982 individuals with laboratory confirmed SARS coronavirus 2 infection. So we know that this is now large scale. So these number of people had reinfections. Laboratory confirmed SARS coronavirus 2. Now the results: 35,670 suspected reinfections were identified from this group. So this is the group that had infections. These are people that definitely had the infection, and at least 90 days ago. So this is longer term immunity they're looking at. So well over 2.5 million people had the infection, and what they found in this time period was that there was 35,670 people reinfected in this time period, 4th of March to the 27th of November. So a lot of reinfections among the 2.7 million individuals with laboratory confirmed SARS coronavirus 2, so 35,000 reinfections. And they tested positive more than 90 days ago, at least 90 days ago. 35,670 individuals with at least 2 infections, 332.
된 시베리안 철갑상어인데요. 저희 농장에서 가장 오래된 고기 중에 하나죠. 거의 10여 년 동안 계속해서 저희에게 수정란을 공급한 그 놈인데요. 저희 농장은 자체적으로 그 치어를 생산해서 사육해서 캐비어를 하는 것까지 전 과정을 하는 곳입니다. 이 퍼실리티 안에는 약 3,500미 정도 있습니다. 각 탱크마다 대략 한 250마리에서 300마리. 2억 5천만 년 전부터 지구상에 존재했던 종이고, 그리고 그 모습이 변하지 않고 지금까지 왔고, 지금의 지구상에 존재했던 종이고, 그리고 그 모습이 변하지 않고 지금까지 왔고, 지금의 환경에 적응하지 못하는 아주 공룡시대 동물인데 인간의 힘으로 복원이 가능한 그런 종이기도 하죠. 여기는 저희가 친어칸이라고 부르는 곳입니다. 암컷들 중에서 좀 더 퀄리티 있는 알을 생산하는 아이들을 선별해서 5일에서 7일 정도의 발생 기간을 거쳐서 부화시켜서 그래서 그 다음에 이제 새끼로 만들어 갑니다. 한국에는 철갑상어 전문 사료는 없습니다. 우리가 캐비아라는 것이 상당히 많은 열량이 필요한 그런 거라고 생각을 해본다면, 그래서 사료 중에서 가라앉으면서 단백질 함량이 좀 높은 사료, 단백질과 조지방 함량이 좀 높은 사료를 사용하고 있습니다. 아무래도 사료 영양분이 그 캐비아에 미치는 영향이 반드시 있을 거라고 생각합니다. 제가 미국에서 유니버시티 오브 플로리다에서 스털전 보존 프로그램에서 일을 한 적이 있었습니다. 그런데 캐비아라는 어떤 식자재 때문에 사람들이 한번 잡아버리면 그 개체수가
individuals with a third infection and one poor individual who had a fourth infection. Although I think it's reasonable to assume there was some immune problem, at least in this last person here. Now, this is where we get down to the real numbers. The relative hazard ratio for wave 2 versus wave 1. So in other words, if you'd had the infection in wave 1, how likely were you to get the infection in wave 2? Well, the answer is only 75% as likely. It was actually a reduced chance of getting the infection, which we'd expect from a degree of immunity. You would expect that. The relative hazard ratio for wave 3 versus wave 1 was 0.71%. And again, roughly what you'd expect a degree of ongoing immunity. So only 71% is likely to get infected as someone who hadn't been infected before. So that's what you would expect. Now, relative hazard ratio for the period the 1st of November 2021 to the 27th of November, so this is the Omicron period, relative hazard ratio there was 2.39. Now that is a big difference. So here we see that they're much less likely.
Вот наоборот. Ну нет. А чё холодно тогда, если минус 8? Чё холод такой? Ну, Черт его знает. Ну вот это. Ну, нет, Эй. Ту-ту-пи-тум, ту-пи-тум. Oh, thank you. Give points.